It had been raining since dawn, a slow, steady kind of rain that seeped into the soil and into bones, soaking the earth and silencing birdsong. Outside St. Bartholomew's Chapel, black umbrellas bobbed like solemn beetles, congregating under grey skies. The chapel bell had tolled just once, low and aching. Inside, the wooden pews creaked beneath the weight of quiet mourners. Old friends, former students, a few neighbours, all gathered to say farewell to Harold Mathers, a man who had lived alone for many years in a modest red-brick cottage at the edge of Willow Lane. No children. His wife, Margaret, had passed almost a decade ago. What remained were memories held loosely by others. A smile at the market, a kind word to a stranger, a gentle voice once heard in classrooms. No one expected a disruption that morning, least of all one that would leave such an imprint. The door creaked. It wasn't loud, but in the hush of the eulogy, it sounded like a cry. Heads turned. There, framed by the rain and dripping threshold, stood a cat, soaked through, his fur plastered in ginger clumps, paws muddy, tail low. He paused, eyes scanning the chapel, not darting, not panicked, as if he knew where he was meant to go. Then, without a sound, he walked slowly down the center aisle. People murmured, some exchanged confused glances, but no one stopped him. The Reverend, mid-sentence, faltered, then stepped back slightly as the cat approached the closed casket at the front of the chapel. He sat, right at the base of it, quiet, composed. His yellow-green eyes gazed up at the wooden box, holding a man he had never met, at least not in the way anyone in the chapel had, and he didn't move. Chapter 2. A breadcrumb trail. After the service, no one quite knew what to say. The cat had remained there through the entire funeral, not fidgeting, not grooming himself, not meowing, just sitting, sometimes blinking, sometimes gazing at the flowers draped across the casket, as though studying them. When the organ played, he tilted his head. When the congregation stood, he stayed seated. When the final prayer was whispered, he closed his eyes. Ellen Thorne hadn't planned to speak to anyone that day. She had known Harold in the quiet way neighbours know one another, from across fences and front steps. But the moment she saw that cat, something stirred. She recognized him. "I've seen that one," she said softly to the man beside her as they stepped out under the awning. "Behind Morley's bakery, always waiting near the back alley." Some others nodded. Yes, they'd seen him too. A skittish stray, feral perhaps. No collar, no tag. A survivor, but always alone. Ellen thought back to one particular afternoon, months ago. She'd stopped at Morley's for a scone and a tea. Harold had been there, as he often was on Thursdays. He always ordered the same, a loaf of oat bread and a small white roll. She once watched him break that roll in half and slip it under the fence behind the bakery, then sit on the weathered bench nearby. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a ginger blur slink from the shadows and devour it. He never chased the cat, never tried to touch him, he just waited. Now here that same cat was, mourning beside Harold's coffin, as if returning a kindness long held in silence. Chapter 3. The Empty Saucer. The day after the funeral, the rain finally stopped. Ellen couldn't sleep that night. She kept thinking of the cat. The way he looked at the casket, the calm stillness of him. There was something more to it, something unfinished. She walked to Harold's cottage the next morning. She still had a key. Harold had given it to her years ago, after Margaret died, just in case of emergencies. She never had to use it, until now. The cottage smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and dried lavender. Dust danced in the streaks of pale light filtering through the lace curtains. She moved carefully through the space, the bookshelf crammed with classics, the radio beside the sink, a flannel blanket folded neatly on the arm of his old chair. In the kitchen, she found it. A chipped blue saucer beside the back door, empty. Just beside it, an old bell on a string dangling from a hook above the threshold. She gave it a slight push. It rang once, a soft, melancholic chime. Had he been feeding the cat here too? Had the quiet friendship behind the bakery grown into something deeper? Ellen stepped out onto the porch. Dew clung to the overgrown grass. She waited. Minutes passed, and then, just as she was about to go back inside, a figure appeared from behind the garden shed. The cat. He paused at the edge of the lawn, eyes fixed on hers. Then slowly, with no fear, no hesitation, he approached the steps. He stopped at the saucer, waited. Ellen's throat tightened. She turned back into the kitchen, poured a little milk into the dish, and returned. He drank, not hungrily, but with familiarity, as if he had done this many times before, and when he was done, he looked up at her, held her gaze for a long, unblinking moment, then curled up on the porch mat and closed his eyes. The next few days passed quietly. Ellen returned to the cottage each morning, and each morning the cat, whom she had begun calling Finn after a storybook her late husband once read aloud, was there, waiting. Sometimes he napped on the porch. Sometimes he sat by the garden fence, blinking at the breeze. On the fifth morning, while sorting through Harold's belongings for the estate executor, Ellen opened a narrow drawer in his writing desk. Inside was a small bundle of folded pages tied with twine. Each page yellowed at the edges, covered in Harold's tidy, looping handwriting. They weren't letters, not really. They were more like diary entries, but each one was dated and addressed. To the cat behind Morley's, to the ginger ghost I can't quite name, to the little one who waits even when I don't deserve him. Ellen sat down, hands trembling, and read. You didn't come today. I waited an hour. I worried you might have been hurt. I brought the roll anyway. You took it from my hand this morning. Only for a second, but it was the best moment of my week. I think you trust me now, or maybe you've just grown tired of running. Either way, I hope it means something. It means everything to me. Tears welled in Ellen's eyes. These were not just musings. They were confessions. Reflections of a man who, after losing his wife, found solace in the quiet company of a creature who asked for nothing but a little food and patience, and perhaps love, in the only language they shared. Chapter 5. A Room for Two. The will was simple. Harold had left the house to a distant niece, but had given Ellen authority to handle his affairs in the meantime. She didn't know what would happen to the cottage in the long run, but for now, she had a plan. She brought over a small bed from her own home, stocked the kitchen, and moved into Harold's place. The transition was quiet, natural even. Finn grew bolder. He now wandered into the living room, curling on Harold's chair, watching birds from the windowsill. When Ellen read aloud from one of the old books, his ears would twitch in time with her voice. One night, a storm blew through town. Thunder shook the panes, and the rain lashed against the roof like fists. Ellen lit a single lamp and sat on the floor, unsure if Finn would come. He did. Sodden, shivering, he meowed for the first time and brushed against her leg. She wrapped him in an old towel, whispered soft words into the stillness. You're safe now. He kept you safe. Let me do the same. From that night on, Finn slept at the foot of her bed. Chapter 6. The Anniversary Service. Exactly 1 year after Harold's funeral, St. Bartholomew's held a remembrance. Just a few people came, no big ceremony, just candles and silence. Ellen walked the familiar path to the chapel, a small bouquet in her hand. Finn followed. It wasn't a leash or a carrier that brought him along. He simply walked beside her, as if he too remembered. They reached the chapel steps. The door was slightly ajar. Finn didn't hesitate. He stepped inside, tail high, and made his way once more to the front, this time not to a coffin, but to a framed photo of Harold surrounded by white lilies. Finn sat. The few gathered there turned and smiled, some wiping at their eyes. A child whispered, "Is that the funeral cat?" And Ellen, voice low, said, "No, he's Harold's cat." No one corrected her. Chapter 7. Full circle. Seasons passed. The cottage grew warm with new life. Ellen planted herbs in the garden, hung fresh curtains, restored Harold's old clock. Finn aged, but gently. He grew softer, slower. Sometimes he'd stare at the garden shed for long stretches, as though remembering the man who once left bread and waited without asking for anything in return. And every evening, Ellen would light a candle, pour 2 cups of tea, one for herself, one left untouched, and sit in Harold's old chair, Finn purring beside her. The bell above the back door still chimed in the breeze, and in that small home, love continued, in poor steps and silence, in memory and care, in the spaces between grief and healing. Some said it was a strange bond, but Ellen knew better. It was the truest kind.